This week, Pope Francis tackles poverty, the Church loses a beloved theologian, and we look at life in the Middle East. Hello and welcome to another edition of Vatican Connections. Things are back to normal at the Vatican, more or less, just in time for what may prove to be a very busy month. But first, the Church has lost a well-loved priest and theologian. Monsignor Lorenzo Albacete died this week at the age of 73. He was one of the leaders of the lay Catholic movement Communion and Liberation in the United States. He was also a theologian, a physicist, and an author. He often gave lectures on the relationship between faith and science and famously took on Christopher Hitchens. Monsignor Albacete was born in Puerto Rico and studied in Washington and Rome. He was a co-founder of the John Paul II Institute in Washington and an advisor on Hispanic affairs for the U.S. bishops. You may have heard that the Sistine Chapel is now open for private functions. Well, the director of the Vatican Museums, Antonio Paolucci, told press this week that the Sistine Chapel is a sacred space and can never be rented out for private parties. So why was Porsche advertising a private concert and dinner at the Vatican Museums as part of one of their Porsche tours? Paolucci told reporters recently that this was part of a new initiative called The Art of Charity. Essentially, private tours or concerts in the Sistine Chapel and other special events like this dinner that the group had on the terrace of the Vatican Museums can be organized. The Vatican Museums will partner with a company which makes a substantial donation to the museums, and then there will be a special tour arranged after closing hours. The chapel, however, cannot be rented for private company parties, as was reported last week. Now this week, the new LED lighting system in the Sistine Chapel was switched on, as was a new air conditioning system. Both are designed to help preserve Michelangelo's frescoes. Pope Francis has confirmed that he is writing an encyclical with a socio-ecological focus. He made the comments speaking to participants at the World Meeting of Popular Movements at the Vatican. Participants included groups from Brazil that fight for land rights for those without land, and Argentina's Cartoneros, and similar groups from other countries. Addressing the group, he said when he speaks of land, work, and roof, people say that the Pope is communist, but those are actually the key concerns of the Church's social doctrine. You'll find the full text of his address to the popular movements on our blog. This week, a unique Catholic Orthodox pilgrimage group visited Rome and met with Pope Francis. CNS has more on this ecumenical group and their experiences.
The focus of the Oriental Lumen Foundation and the Oriental Lumen conferences that we've been holding in Washington for 18 years and other parts of the world as well has been to bring East and West together at a local, individual, personal level. So we have with us about 40 persons, Catholics and Orthodox mixed, about equally split amongst all the different churches. And at least my goal is for this group of people to get to know each other, and by the end of these 10 days, return back to America as friends and to continue to spread the idea of church unity.
What we need to further the work of unity are ecumenical friendships, not merely theoretical statements in official reports, but meetings face to face, person to person. If we are to unite, we must first learn to love one another, and if we are to love one another, we must first get to know one another. And it is in this context that I see the work of our group, Orientale Lumen.
We can come together and pray. And we can pray in a very similar way. We can do a lot of prayer together. We share a lot of commonality in that regard. So this is very significant, that we can come together and pray, and then that way respect each other's worship, each other's traditions. Even though, and this is the negative, when it comes to especially the Eucharistic celebration, we cannot receive Eucharist from one another yet, which that would be the negative, but it's also ought to be motivational in the sense that pain that we feel from that, and it's very real among our group. We can have lots of great times together, we can learn together, pray together, but when it comes to the Eucharist, participating in the body of Christ together, we can't yet do that. So that pain should be motivational.
We have not solved all our difficulties yet, but the whole way in which Orthodox Catholic relations are now discussed is deeply different from what existed before Vatican II. What has always troubled the Orthodox is what they understand to be the claim on the Roman Catholic side that the Pope has supreme jurisdiction over the whole Church, and that this jurisdiction is ordinary and immediate. This is the language of the First Vatican Council. Now, I was struck that Cardinal Koch did not wish to use that language, and he indeed said that there was no historical basis for claiming that in the first millennium the Pope had exercised this kind of direct jurisdiction. And here I note a very striking change in the Catholic approach. On the whole today, I note that you speak of the service of the Pope to the whole Church, not of his power. And this makes it much easier for the Orthodox to accept the idea of papal primacy. So I feel there are promising developments here.
Finally, we are still unpacking all of the issues that were discussed at the recent synod. Catholic News Service spoke to Archbishop Sviatoslav Shevchuk about the impact of war on families.
The mothers in Ukraine today, they are in big distress because they have to send their sons to a war. And many of them will receive their sons in a coffin. This is a tragedy. Today, especially family is under a big threat because of the consequences of that war. Because war brings poverty, economical crisis, disemployment. So mother and father today are thinking, well, how we will heat our house during the next winter. So many families today are forced to flee from their homes. And when you're supposed to leave your home, to leave all your previous personal and family history, to leave your old mother or father who are not able to travel with you, to leave graves of your ancestors, to leave your churches. This is a tragedy. Very often we would think about the assistance to the refugees only in the economical or humanitarian terms, how to provide for them food, medical assistance and others. But we as a church, we're trying to look wider on the human and Christian situation of those families.
While major attention is currently focused on Africa and the Ebola virus right now, war continues in the Middle East. In many countries, the situation becomes increasingly complex and dangerous by the day. But through it all, Jesuit Refugee Services has stayed in the area, witnessing the changes and the destruction. I recently spoke to Father Peter Balleis, the outgoing international director of JRS, about what he and his team have seen there. So Pope Francis speaks quite forcefully about the plight of refugees and migrants, and I think a lot of people don't realize how many organizations within the church that are part of the church actually work to serve those very people that Pope Francis is talking about. So tell us a little bit about JRS. I think a lot of people don't know that it exists and it's there and what it does.
JRS is a work of the Society of Jesus. That's why the name Jesuit Refugee Service. And it was founded in 1980 by the Superior General Father Pedro Arrupe. At that time, it was funded in response to the massive crisis of boat people from Indochina, Cambodia, Vietnam. And being a Catholic order, an international congregation, Father Arrupe said we should respond to this big international crisis as an international body and pool resources, Jesuits, others together. But it was always meant as a work of collaboration of Jesuits, of lay people, of other congregations, priests, sisters, many lay people. It has been from the beginning a work of collaboration of Christians and non-Christians. In Asia, many Hindus or many Buddhists in that part. In Africa, traditional religions. In the Middle East, we have a lot of Muslim collaborators. So it is not just a work of the Jesuits, but it is a platform, a structure to respond. The structure is a modern structure of an international non-governmental organization, because that's the most adequate way of responding to crisis areas. Like there are many organizations, but there are many faith-based organizations. For us, we identify us, as I said, as a Catholic organization, as a work of the Society of Jesus. And we had some discussion in our team when we defined new words, our mission, and we said, we are inspired by the love and compassion of Jesus for the poor and marginalized. That means not everyone has to be a Catholic or a Christian. Many are non-Muslim, Christian, but people, we all can be inspired by that example. For them, for the Christians, of course, it's Jesus is the Son of God and what we believe, what we stand for. For others, he's definitely a prophet, a man who loved the poor, and that is inspiring for all of us, because at the very end, it's the compassion to be where the people are, where they suffer, and we believe that God is present even in the in particular, most tragic moments of human history, and war, conflict, displacement are very tragic moments in the life of nations, of individuals, and that's where we try to make God's love and compassion present to people.
So what does that mean on the ground? What are some of the services that you provide on the ground, and which areas are you currently working in?
We do a lot of work in the field of education. It's a tradition of the church, education, in particular the tradition of the Jesuits.
Right.
And education is, of course, it's a right that children go to school, but it is also a deep spiritual means. It gives hope in a situation where people have lost hope. It gives better ideas. It's forming new people.
Right.
And that's why education is so much key. Besides education, it's the psychosocial work, pastoral work. But of course, pastoral is if you take it in the more narrow sense, it is the care for Christians, Catholics in a camp, having that
Right.
service, we do, but most of the refugees, and now 70% of the refugees in the world are Muslim. So what does it mean? If you're not
Yeah.
converting people, that's not our thing. But to show love, to care for their spiritual and personal well-being, the psychological, and that has different forms. You know, you have people violated, gender-based violence, a lot of women through activities in groups and learning something new are all means for psychosocial care. Then, of course, and like in Syria now, and this is a bit unusual to us, that size, but being placed so uniquely as Jesuits in Syria with the structure of the different churches, we do a lot of food aid to people, to reach out to family, food baskets, food supplies, non-food items, to close to 300,000. Altogether, we reach closer to 1 million people in direct services. 1/4 are people children in school, from kindergarten to university. We do now online university and refugee camps. That's our latest development, and food supply and so on.
So if someone is watching this and hearing this, and they're watching the news on a daily basis and they're being moved by what they're seeing on television, how can they get involved? Can they support, is there a way to support JRS from North America? Or what do you advise? How does the average Catholic get involved?
When Father Arupe watched the television show in 1980 and 1979, and then he wrote his letter to the Jesuit superiors around the world, said, seeing these pictures, these images, this tragedy, basically moved by that, the compassion, I call on you to work together.
Right.
And that's the first thing. People who feel compassion, but not hopelessness, because one can do something. The little thing is a lot. And we have a whole network of people who support us within the society and within the church and also government. But very important are for us organizations of the Society of Jesus, like the Canadian Jesuits International. They mobilize resources, so fundraising here in Toronto, and then pass it on and help us at a very early stage in a flexible way that we can do what is quickly, what is needed. And of course we report to them and to everyone when asked and so on. But that is very important. These partners, or like Development and Peace and other church organizations, but in particular the own in the family, Canadian Jesuits International, are very appreciated for their support, and repeatedly in big crisis areas, they have come in very quickly, informed people, and they are the ones also to inform the public here on our behalf. So we can operate on a very lean infrastructure because we have these partners. We don't need to operate communication here in Canada because it's being done by our partners.
Right.
That's why we can operate very effectively, and we have, if there's often a question people ask, our overheads, like an international regional office, is not more than 10%. So we spend, out of the 1 million refugees per refugee on average, some more, some less, $52 per person US dollars, and $5 are for managing, because if you don't manage well, your quality of your work is also not good. But we talk about 10% and not more.
Okay. My very last question, just very briefly. You've been the head of JRS since 2007, and I understand that the plight of refugees and migrants has always been something that moved you. How did you get involved?
I mean, I was asked when I came back from Brazil because I knew Portuguese, but I guess maybe there were some more other reasons. And looking back, like in life, you look back at your own parents. Also, I'm born 57. When my mother married into the farm of my father in 1946, train loads arrived, millions from former German-speaking population areas in Eastern Europe. They had to be put up somewhere. So the American administration in Bavaria, they went around and said, okay, you have a village, you have a house, you have so many people here, you have food, and you have so many rooms, you have to take 2 or 3. So for 6 years in our house, there were 3 refugee couples living in our house with a family. My elder brother, they learned very perfect German, not Bavarian dialect, because they were educated by the refugees. We had a lifelong good relationship with them when they moved on, built up their own lives. So somehow, the example of my parents having handled that situation, yes, it was an order by the administration, but handling it in a human, generous way as Christians, I always, if I return back and say, it gives me integrity personally, because my parents did that, to say yes, to ask also other states and other organizations, treat the refugees well, take them in. They are at the end a gain and not so much a burden. They are winning for everyone.
Pope Francis is back to his usual packed schedule of events. Over the weekend, he met with members of the Schoenstatt movement, a German-based movement founded 100 years ago by Father Joseph Kentenich. During that meeting, Pope Francis said the family is under attack now more than ever, and it's because of a culture of division that destroys bonds. He was also asked 5 questions from 5 different members of the movement, and in response to one of those questions, he said, "We must accompany families, and the best way to accompany people is to, quote, waste time with people, showing them what a life in Christ looks like." On Monday, Pope Francis unveiled a bronze bust of Pope Benedict XVI at the Pontifical Academy of Science. He said Pope Benedict was a great pope whose papacy was marked by his intellect, his contribution to theology, and his love for the Church. He also said his spirit will appear greater and more powerful from generation to generation. Wednesday, of course, was the general audience, and CNS has more on that.
Di fronte all'aggravarsi dell'epidemia di Ebola, desidero esprimere la mia viva preoccupazione per questa implacabile malattia che sta diffondendo specialmente nel continente africano, soprattutto tra le popolazioni più disagiate. Sono vicino con l'affetto e la preghiera alle persone colpite, come pure ai medici, agli infermieri, ai volontari, agli istituti religiosi e alle associazioni che si prodigano eroicamente per soccorrere questi nostri fratelli e sorelle ammalati. Rinnovo il mio appello affinché la comunità internazionale metta in atto ogni necessario sforzo per debellare questo virus, alleviando concretamente i disagi e le sofferenze di quanti sono così duramente provati. Vi invito a pregare per loro e per quanti hanno perso la vita.
And on Thursday, Pope Francis met with Martin Schulz, the President of the European Parliament. The Pope will be visiting and addressing the EU Parliament in Strasbourg on November 25th. Work is back to normal at the Vatican, and that means resignations and nominations. So let's see who has a new job this week. Santo Amaro, Brazil has a new coadjutor bishop. Giuseppe Negri is a member of the Pontifical Institute for Foreign Missions. Until now, he was Bishop of Blumenau. Cusco, Peru has a new archbishop. Juan Antonio Ugarte Perez retired, and Pope Francis appointed Richard Alarcón Urrutia, who was previously in the Diocese of Tarma. In the Philippines, Bishop Bernardino Cortés has been named the head of the territorial prelature of Infanta. And finally, in Haiti, Bishop Quenel Alphonse has been named Bishop of Fort Liberté. Vatican Connections is interactive. We answer your questions and explain things you want to know. You can reach us on Twitter at VatiConnections or by email at info@saltandlighttv.org. We'll try our best to answer your questions during this part of our show. That's all for this edition of Vatican Connections. As always, you can follow us on Twitter or Facebook or check our blog for regular updates throughout the week. From everyone here, thanks for watching and see you next time.